Welcome to our podcast. Today, we are honored to host Dimitri Lascaris, a former Wall Street lawyer who transitioned into becoming a fearless journalist and pro-Palestinian activist. Dimitri's journey from corporate law to becoming a prominent voice of justice and human rights is nothing short of inspiring. Together, we'll delve into his career evolution, his advocacy for the Palestinian cause, his Lebanese journey, and his perspectives on international and Canadian politics. Stay tuned for a thought-provoking conversation. In 2012 and 2013, you were recognized as one of Canada's most influential lawyers and business figures. Accordingly, why and how Palestine?
Well, at the time that I received those recognitions, I wasn't particularly active in the Palestinian solidarity movement. And I suspect if I had been, I would not have received those distinctions. At that time, I was sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but I was more focused on class actions against large Canadian corporations. And that's what attracted the recognition from the legal profession and from the corporate media. It wasn't anything I was doing on behalf of Palestinians. And I think what really, there were two sort of seminal moments in my evolution as a Palestinian solidarity activist. The first one was I read Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. Not just Noam Chomsky, Edward Herman in 2006. Until that time, I actually would have described myself as being modestly pro-Israel. But when I read that book, much of which relates to the lies that we are told in the West about Israel and Palestine, that had a huge impact on me. And I was actually quite angry because I felt I had been lied to about that and a number of other very important issues. And then came the 2014 war on Gaza. Now, in retrospect, it seems almost inconsequential compared to what they're doing to the Palestinians today. And that's very alarming that we now look at 2014 as a restraint. But at the time, it was viewed by many of us, including me, as being absolutely abominable what the Israelis did to the Palestinians in those several weeks of war. So after that, I was fully committed to the Palestinian cause, and I began to speak out publicly.
Okay, well, let's start with your personal journey. I mean, you studied law in University of Toronto. Okay, so why did you choose law, first of all?
I have to go back a little bit in time to explain that. I studied undergrad at the University of Western Ontario, and after 3 years, I decided that post-secondary education was a waste of time, and that I wanted to be a writer. So I spent 4 months working at 2 full-time jobs, menial jobs. I was a waiter and a janitor, and I was scrounging together whatever money I could, and then I took off my plan was to leave and go to Europe forever and not come back to Canada and not complete my degree and be a writer. I just wanted to be a writer. And at that time in my life, I was much inspired. I don't know why. I mean, I had to figure this out, but I was very inspired by the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who lived on a mountain in Switzerland and wrote books for much of his life. So I was going to emulate him. But I quickly learned that poverty is no fun. And so, because I lived in poverty. I ate at McDonald's every day. I had to stay in hostels with 15, 16 other young men who weren't well washed, who snored. One night I remember in Rome, I actually slept standing up in a phone booth in late November. It was one of the coldest nights of my life because I couldn't get into a hostel. I got there too late. And by the time I'd done that for a year, I just decided I didn't want to be poor. So I looked around and I thought, what is the best way for me to avoid poverty? And I decided it was to become a lawyer, which my parents wanted me to do. They were urging me to do that. And then my intention when I got into law school was not actually to become a practicing lawyer. It was to become, to get a law degree and then move on to become a financier on Wall Street.
Okay.
So back then, suffice to say, my politics were very different when I was a young man. Very different.
And you graduated in University of Toronto, what year?
91.
91, okay. And you went on to work in Ontario, or what did you do exactly?
I immediately left Toronto and I got a job on Wall Street at a big firm.
Following that financier dream, or
Exactly.
okay.
And I actually wasn't a litigator there. I was a securities lawyer. I represented banks and insurance companies and foreign governments. Like I represented the German government, the French government in connection with some privatizations. And then I really found that to be a soul-crushing experience.
Why?
Because all I was doing was serving the wealthy and the corporatocracy, and that's not where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, despite my politics when I was a young man, I was raised in a conservative family, but I came from a very humble family.
Mm-hmm.
My parents didn't even have a high school education.
Mm-hmm.
So I just felt out of place, and it was not what I wanted to do with my life. So I left the legal profession for a few years after Wall Street, and then I decided I would come back, but this time I was going to fight for the victims of injustice rather than the perpetrators of injustice. Mm-hmm. So I became a class actions lawyer in Canada.
Okay. And you said that in 2006, or you read a book in 2006?
The progression was I finished working on Wall Street in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Then I took 3 years off.
Yeah.
Then I came to Canada in 2004. So already my politics has started shifting then. By the time I get to 2004.
There's just a time period that I'm missing. I think you worked in Paris too?
Paris and New York, but it was the same law firm.
It was the same law firm? Was the experience the same in Paris and New
Actually, that was, I guess, part of my evolution in that when I moved to Paris, New York was really just a rat race. It was everybody I worked with was completely obsessed with making money. Mm-hmm. And the privilege of representing, the wealthy and large corporations. Paris, when I went to Paris, it was still very much the Paris of François Mitterrand, mm-hmm. even though Chirac was the president.
Yeah, exactly.
It was still that kind of a place,
mm-hmm.
and it had a social conscience, and people were much more, like there were strikes all the time. I was always amazed by how many strikes there were in Paris, and people said, this is the way the French are. They strike for their rights. And there was a much better balance between work and life, like very few people worked on the weekend. There were relatively few people, homeless people on the streets of Paris at that time. It was much worse in New York City there. So I saw that model of social organization and economic organization, and it appealed to me more. I think that did influence me when I decided to, because I actually was sent to Paris on a 2-year stint. That's what the firm told me. I asked them, please send me to Paris. I want to go to Paris. So they said, yes, we'll send you, but you have 2 years. So at the end of the 2 years, I had to either go back to New York City or leave. And I opted to leave. I didn't want to go back. And a lot of it had to do with what I saw in Paris.
Just the reason it stayed in my mind is, do you speak French?
Yes.
How were you born in Ontario or Quebec?
Ontario.
Okay, and your French is because it was a French second language in Ontario, or is there a reason you learned the actual French language?
I studied French in high school, and I guess I could read it, mm-hmm. but I really couldn't speak it. And then when I went to Paris, I kind of had a crash course in French. I was functional, but I didn't really become comfortable in French until I got married. To a French woman.
Okay, I see.
Of Algerian origin.
So now it all makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So actually, I met her when I was in New York, and she's from Lyon. Uh-huh. And so when we got married and we began to speak French to each other every day, and we actually raised our kids in French, then I really began to speak French.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of questions that are answered immediately. But we'll continue. You said that at a certain time you're sympathetic to the Israeli cause.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Oh, I was raised, I was inundated, as we all are, in Western society with the idea that Israel is a democracy, that it is an island of civility in a sea of barbarism. This is the way it's presented to us. Mm-hmm. That it's surrounded by people who are bent on the destruction of Israel because they have some kind of irrational hostility towards the Jewish people. And I went to Israel, actually during this period when I left university and I spent a year traveling by myself in Europe. I also went to Israel for the first time.
What year was that?
That would have been 1985.
Okay. That's prior to the Intifada?
Yes,
Okay.
it was prior to the Intifada. It would have been during the occupation of Lebanon. But I did not go to Lebanon for the first time in my life until last year, so I didn't know anything about Lebanon. When I went to Israel, I saw it from the Israeli perspective. I stayed in, mostly in West Jerusalem. Now when I go, I stay strictly in East Jerusalem. I attended events that were organized by the American evangelical community. I actually, the first time I arrived in Jerusalem, I went to the Wailing Wall, and I was just standing there. I was an atheist at that point in my life, right? And I had just become an atheist, and I was standing there just sort of admiring the history of it. And a rabbi walked up to me, and he said to me, young man, are you Jewish? And just because I was curious, I said to him, my mother's Jewish, my father's Greek. He said, come with me. And he ended up putting me up in a yeshiva for a week.
What's a yeshiva?
Well, it was like, as I understood it, it was like an educational institution for young Jewish men. Yeah. So they gave me free room and board for a week with other, well, I'm not Jewish, but with other Jewish men, and I played along. And we received instruction in the Torah. After about a week, I realized, I couldn't keep up this pretense, and I just politely thanked him and moved on. But my point is, I was interested and inclined to see things from the perspective of the Jewish population of historic Palestine, because that's what I had been taught growing up. And actually, I think probably the very first seed of my Palestinian solidarity activism was planted on that trip. Because there was one thing that happened on that trip. But it took me a long time to work it out. And that is that I was, there was a point in time where I had to stay in this youth hostel in the Arab quarter of Jerusalem, because I couldn't find a place to stay in the Jewish quarter of Old Jerusalem. And I came down with this terrible case of food poisoning. And they had me in this room with like 10 other guys. And in the middle of the night, I was just sweating profusely and shaking in my bed. And two brothers who owned the hostel, they were Palestinians, they saw that I was sick, and they offered to help me. And they said, we need to take you to the hospital. In the middle of the night, they took me and they put me in the back of their car. And along the way, for some reason, I don't know why, they got into a terrible argument. And the two of them they pulled the car over on the side of the road. I had a blanket around me.
While
it was
you were
late
sick.
at night. I'm sitting in the back, and I'm trembling and sweating. And the two of them are in the front street, and they start having a terrible argument with each other, shouting at each other in Arabic. I didn't know what it was all about. And I had the first thought I went in my head was, they're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. And then so for some reason, they calmed down. I don't still to this very day know why they had this fight. They worked it out, and they continued along, and they dropped me off at the hospital where I received care. And the doctor told me I might have died if I hadn't gone to the hospital. And afterwards, I thought to myself, that's terrible what I thought about these young men, I assumed that these guys were going to kill me, but in fact, they saved me, It's like, that's screwed up. It's wrong.
During that trip, though, you didn't notice any systemic racism, any way the Israelis were talking about the Palestinians, or you were indoctrinated to such a point at that age where you didn't notice those things? It wasn't.
I noticed the Israeli soldiers being rude to the Palestinians in the Arab quarter of Jerusalem. I definitely noticed that. But I assumed that they were doing that because these men were dangerous and they were trying to protect themselves and their fellow citizens. I had no idea really about the reality of the situation.
Okay, so that timeline goes from, you went back to your studies, you finished your studies, you did Wall Street, you took 3 years off, and then you went back, but you were working something, you were working as what exactly? Sorry.
So I became a class actions lawyer
lawyer
for plaintiffs, not for defendants.
Plaintiffs, yeah.
So my specialty, because I had worked on Wall Street, was securities fraud. So most of my clients were small investors, oftentimes just workers, small business people, who would put money in some stock, some company, and they lost a lot of money because a fraud had been committed. So I used my knowledge as a securities lawyer, which I gained on Wall Street, to assist them and to prosecute claims against companies on their behalf, large groups of investors.
Okay.
Oftentimes thousands, tens of thousands even of investors. So that's what a class action is.
Okay. And we're at 2014. What's the name of that war? There's a
I
name.
think, was it Protective Edge?
Protective Edge. Was it there? They were the first time they used mowing the lawn.
No, they had used it before.
Oh, they used it
Yeah,
before.
there was
Maybe.
2009. I think there was 2011, 2012. I think might have been the third one, and then 2014.
Okay.
So they coined that, I think, back in the
Yeah.
2009.
That's scary.
Yeah.
And accordingly, you started your advocacy for Palestinian rights after that or during that?
After that.
Okay.
I participated in a number of protests
Mhm.
that summer, 2014.
Okay, this is when.
Yeah, but I was not, occasionally I would put out a tweet about Palestine. I was active on social media by that point in time, but I was very careful.
Mhm.
And in fact, even though I was being very careful, one day a partner of mine, we were very close in my law firm. Professionally, we were actually friends, who was a liberal Zionist,
Mhm.
came into my office and he closed the door because I had put out some tweet criticizing Netanyahu, and he said, you got to be very careful because they're people, clients of our firm. He was talking about himself, but he didn't put it that way to me.
Mhm.
He said, they're clients of our firm who feel very strongly about Israel, so you need to be very careful about what you say. So I said to him, look, there's a principle here that needs to be defended. Sorry, I'm not trying to piss anybody off, but I feel as a matter of conscience I have to speak out. So I did, but I was still very careful because I didn't want to alienate my partners. It wasn't just him. There were a number of people in my firm who were very pro-Israel. And there were clients in our firm who were very pro-Israel. So I was very guarded. But after 2014, it was like, that's it. I said, to hell with this. I'm not going to show restraint anymore.
I want to come back to that, but I just want to see the timeline. Of the evolution of how you approach your, I would say, pro-Palestinian journey. Where in all of this did you meet your French Algerian wife?
Oh, I met her in the 90s.
Oh, okay. And did she help in changing your mind about the Palestinian plight or no?
She definitely is and always has been pro-Palestinian, no doubt about it. But she was more, I think for me, the real education I got from my wife in those early years of our marriage was about what the French had done to Algeria.
Yeah, for sure.
That I was completely clueless.
It's insane, huh?
And so she was, and I saw in France, living in France in the 90s, how much bigotry, even though it was still the France of François Mitterrand, relatively humane compared to the France of today, and it was still a place where you could see that there was racism towards people from the Maghreb.
North Africa.
Right. And so that was primarily what I learned from her. I've probably devoted more time to the Palestinian cause. I have, without question, than my wife has. But she supports it. She supports completely, what I do.
And you see a lot of people, especially from Algeria, supporting that cause. I think they see themselves in Palestinians because of the 100 years of occupation. Is it 100 years?
Something like that. I was actually talking to her about this yesterday. It's about 100 years. Okay. Yeah, they lost, several million people. The French killed.
They always say the country of 1 million martyrs, but it's almost like in those 100 years, it's almost 9 million. So
yes.
So it's
huge
people don't
number.
mention it for whatever reason, and I think it's interesting that people forget to mention that number.
Yeah.
We were talking about the pressures that you faced initially when you started talking publicly about the Palestinian plight inside of your job. I'm just interested. There's a lot of lawyers maybe that they're listening to this episode. Okay. You mentioned one example of how people confronted you regarding that, but how far can actually people put pressure on you within your firm and outside of your firm because you stand with Palestine? And what would you recommend for people that are in law firms that want to stand for what on the right side of history but are scared to lose their livelihood?
Well, one of the cases that I took on this year for the Palestinian Solidarity Movement involved law students at Toronto Metropolitan University at the Lincoln Alexander School of Law. In October of last year, 20 days or so after the October 7th attacks, and by that time, Israel's leaders had said things that were openly genocidal, and they had begun to massacre people in Gaza. They signed a letter, and the letter, from my perspective, there's nothing wrong with the letter. It's a strongly worded letter, but it was entirely justified, and they addressed that letter to the administration. It wasn't a public letter. I think there was some 50 or 60 students who signed that letter. Somebody leaked the letter, and the administration, following the lead of some ultra-Zionist lawyers in Ontario, immediately accused these students of anti-Semitism. And they hired a judge, a former Chief Justice of Nova Scotia, to conduct an internal review and authorize the judge to recommend their expulsion. So potentially they would be.
And we're talking just about students that were just.
Yeah. And the lawyers out there, one, I don't mind mentioning them. One of them is Howard Levitt, who has a column in the National Post and is considered to be one of the best employment lawyers in Canada. He was literally calling for their heads on a platter. In the National Post, in this column, he was sending letters to the law school, demanding that they be expelled. He was sending letters to other people in the legal profession.
Howard Levitt?
Howard Levitt, insisting that they not be given a job if they were allowed to complete their law degrees. Why am I telling you the story? To explain that it's extremely dangerous, unfortunately, for young lawyers to speak out. On the one hand, I urge everybody to act in accordance with their conscience, and the right thing to do is to defend the Palestinian cause. But the truth of the matter is that the legal profession will punish you, and almost did punish these young students severely. Ultimately, we persuaded this retired judge that there was nothing anti-Semitic about this letter, and that's what he decided. And he issued a report, and he said, I don't believe any penalty should be imposed on these students. I might not have said things the way they said them. The letter was strongly worded, but it's not anti-Semitic, and they don't deserve any penalty. But at the same time, there's nothing to stop, members of the legal profession, Zionists, from refusing to hire them in the future because of what they did, because they signed that letter. So they may still, at some point in the future, face consequences. I'm able to do this because at the point at which I became very engaged in the Palestinian cause, I was financially secure. I didn't need a job. I didn't need clients. And I didn't need an income from the practice of law at all. But if I had done this earlier in my career, it probably would have cost me a considerable amount of money and considerable professional opportunities. So all I can say to young people is, act in accordance with your conscience, but be aware that there's a price to be paid, and make sure that you have good legal advice, and that, if they come after you, get representation and defend yourself, because they will come after you.
I just find it interesting that, if out of all the people that should be able to handle that kind of pressure, I would assume it's a young lawyer, because they have the tools and the knowledge to be able to defend themselves. Am I wrong?
No, I would say the opposite. I'd say young lawyers, I guess the tools, in the sense that they have the motivation and the energy, maybe in that sense they have the tools. But the problem is that they are emerging. If they're young lawyers, they have gone through a legal education that is extremely expensive. They are probably burdened with a large amount of student debt. They need to not only pay their debts, but to make a living after spending 7 years or more perhaps in university. And so they're very vulnerable economically, very vulnerable. And I can't tell you how many young law students have come up to me, and young lawyers, dozens in the last year, have approached me and said, I have tremendous admiration for what you do, but I'm afraid to speak out. I've heard that so many times, Mustafa, and I completely understand where they're coming from. If I were in their position, I too would be afraid to speak out. It takes a lot of courage when you're at the beginning of your career, you have no savings, you have a mountain of student debt, to risk your livelihood to defend any cause. That takes a lot of courage.
And we're talking about causes. Let's talk about the cause right now, the most important cause, which is post-October 7th genocide. Like, how did you hear about October 7th, and how did you react?
I was actually in the south of France visiting my sister-in-law with my wife. We hadn't seen her in 3 or 4 years. A little village called Tarbes near the border with Spain, and on the day of our departure, we were in a little hotel in this village, and I woke up and I went down into the lobby, and I was working on my computer, and there was a television screen behind me. And I could hear these French talking heads on some news program going on and on about Gaza, just nonstop. And it became annoying at one stage. I was trying to filter it out. I thought it's just more, propaganda. But there was something wrong. I could tell something was wrong because they just wouldn't stop talking about Gaza. So I turned around and I started watching the television set, and immediately realized that something very unusual had happened. We had to get on a plane that day and go back to Greece, where we have a second home. By the time we got to Greece, it had become reasonably clear that there had been a major attack, and that over 1,000 Israelis had been killed. And then very quickly after that, the statements started coming out of the Israeli leadership about the total siege and the human animals in Gaza, and they're going to deprive them of food, fuel, and water. We're going to send Gaza back to the Stone Age. And I knew that this was going to be awful. I knew this was going to be much worse than 2014. I didn't have any idea it was going to be this bad. Even I was shocked. But we can come back to that later. But I did know very quickly that it was going to be far worse than anything the people of Gaza had experienced. So I said to my wife, we were in Greece at this point now, several days after the October 7th attacks, and I said to her, I just can't sit here. I got to do something. I can't stay here and not do something. She goes, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I want to go to Palestine, but I don't think they're going to let me in. Because by that point in time, I'd become pretty well known, I think, to the Israelis. So I said, I think, the next best choice is to go to Lebanon. At that point in time, some hostilities had started.
Is that the end of October? Or
it was about 10 days.
10 days in? So we're talking 17, 18?
Yeah, and the thing that really made up my mind for me was, I think it was around the 14th or 15th of August, right after there was a major attack on Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza in the first few days of the war, and a missile strike killed dozens of Palestinians who were sheltering in the courtyard of that hospital.
They obviously dispinned it, and they said that...
They said it was an errant rocket from Islamic Jihad and everything. So Hassan Nasrallah called for a day of rage. That's what he said. We're going to have a day of rage throughout the region. And so I can't remember the exact date, but it was about 10 days after October 7th. I arrived in Beirut on the day of rage. And I was told by a couple of friends in Lebanon that the main action was going to be at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. So I get off the plane at 2 p.m. I drop my bags off at my hotel, and I go to the U.S. Embassy. And I couldn't believe what I saw. It was like chaos, complete and utter chaos. There was thousands of people in the streets. They were throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails at Lebanese army soldiers. The Lebanese army soldiers had created like a wall separating the protesters from the U.S. Embassy. There was a building on fire. I saw one young man go by me with his eye popped out of his head. Apparently he had taken a tear gas canister to the face.
From the Lebanese soldiers?
From one of the soldiers. He was on a scooter, on the back of a scooter, and somebody was trying to get him to a hospital. That's literally what I saw as I arrived there. And then I kind of hung out, but being careful, and I saw the most remarkable scene. At one point, these Lebanese soldiers who had been on the receiving end of these barrages of rocks picked up the rocks and started throwing them back at the protesters. I've never seen soldiers throw rocks at protesters before. It was something. But anyways, that was sort of my my way of becoming involved in this struggle. The struggle to put an end to this genocide it started in Lebanon. And I went to Lebanon 3 times after that. Mm-hmm. And most recently in October. And we can talk about that, but that was like a whole other, that's been a tremendously enriching experience.
I mean, okay, considering we opened up the subject, I mean, how did you find Lebanon initially? That's the first time you went there, right? How did you find
The first time I went was before the genocide, and it was it was just a few months before.
Ah, okay. What did you go there, do there just to visit?
No, I went there because I'd never been to Lebanon, and I started taking journalism more seriously, and I knew that Lebanon, from friends, Lebanese Canadians, was in a very, very difficult situation after the port explosion in Beirut and the hyperinflation. The electricity system had collapsed, so I just wanted to go there and as a journalist and learn about the country. And I also wanted to investigate the position of Palestinians, but it was mostly to figure out, just trying to understand Lebanon. And I hired a Lebanese Canadian journalist who lives in Beirut now, and she
What's
works.
his name?
Her name is.
I'm not going to put you on the spot.
I can't believe her name escapes me now.
That's fine.
Anyway, she works for Radio Canada.
Radio Canada.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
she gave you a tour, basically?
she became my fixer. So basically, I hired her to guide me around Lebanon. So she took me to Shatila. I'd never been there before. I mean,
Sabra and Shatila camp, where the massacre happened in '82.
Right. We went to the southern border. We went to Marjayoun. And then there was this Hezbollah has this kind of museum. It's like on a hill where they have tunnels.
I know where were you talking about. It's I forgot its
name.
name.
It's not Al Qiyam, is it? Is it Qiyam? No.
No, just give me Hassan. He's gonna give us the information.
Okay. And they also.
What's the camp called in south of Lebanon that has all the you can visit it? It's like a museum.
It has tunnels.
Mlita.
That's it.
Yeah,
yes.
There's a restaurant.
Yes,
exactly.
Then there was another place they took me where the Israelis during the occupation had tortured people. There was a torture camp, which was close by. It was on a hill.
It's like an old fortress, right?
Yes,
it's
exactly.
near Nabatieh. I know where you're talking about.
That's right. And another place that really was striking, they took me to this park, which had been built with money from Iran. And in the park, there was this gigantic cardboard cutout of Qasem Soleimani.
Yeah.
And so this park is on a hill, and it overlooks northern Palestine, right? And so this cardboard cutout of Soleimani is pointing towards, Palestine. I think they probably have destroyed that park by now. It's not.
I think they did.
Yeah,
I think they did. And the first few days when they tried to infiltrate the south.
So this was my introduction to Lebanon. Most of the time I actually spent not in Beirut but in the south.
You mentioned something very interesting. I wrote it down. You said northern Palestine now, and in a recent interview with senior Hezbollah leader Ammar al-Musawi, you repeatedly use the term northern Palestine. And that term is usually, I would say, not used by Westerners that are sympathetic with the Palestinian cause, because it has some kind of implication that when you say northern Palestine, you're implicating something. So I want you to elaborate if you can.
Well, when I was traveling throughout the South, I kept saying Israel, and people kept saying, we don't call it that here. Please stop using that word. That's Palestine. And, at one point near Nakura, we were on a coastal highway that was maybe a few kilometers from the border with Palestine, and there's a sign which says Palestine, 10 kilometers right on the road. So I just got accustomed to using that language, and it seemed to me to be, the right thing to do. So the other thing I learned to do was to talk about people, to use the word martyr to describe people who are resisting in some fashion or another who are killed by Israel. I never did that before. I also stopped calling Hezbollah, and I generally started referring to them as the resistance. So these were habits I picked up in Lebanon, and I be honest with you, I feel perfectly comfortable with that language. I think it feels right.
Okay. And so you went there prior to let's say October 7th. You went to
One
Lebanon.
time before
Yeah,
October 7th.
and then you went back, let's say October 17th, October 18th, the day of rage
Yeah.
you mentioned. And how long did you stay there?
I think I stayed there 2 weeks.
Okay. And
Time.
And you said you went there a third time?
I went there a third time and a fourth time. So the third time would have been in, I think it was April or May of this year.
Okay.
And this time I had to switch fixers
Mm-hmm.
because my fixer couldn't get me into the south anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I had to get a fixer from Al Mayadeen.
Mm-hmm.
And he got me into some incredible places.
I think I saw a lot of you went. Was it when Saleh Al Gharouri was killed in Beirut? Because the Saleh Al Gharouri, who is the Hamas leader, the first one that was killed in Beirut in this like apartment building. Because I remember you were showing a video of a completely destroyed building.
That was Fouad Shkour.
Fouad Shukr, that's in
Yeah.
August then.
That was, wait a second.
Fouad Shukr is in August. You didn't show.
I'm missing a trip. So there's 5 trips.
Okay.
So there was one 6 months before the October 7th attack, so
Okay.
early 2023. Then it was October. Then there was one in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was one in August. And then there was one in October.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the last 3, I had to use a different fixer, Hadi Hotait.
Mm-hmm.
But the first 2 was
Hadi
with
Hotait?
my Lebanese-Canadian fixer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, what did you do the third time and the fourth time in April and August?
So the third time, we went and we rented a chalet. They called it a chalet, but it was just like, an Airbnb near the border with Palestine. And it was, you could see the Al-Manada military base from this place. And we went to Nabatea. We went to Bin Jbeil. We spent a good bit of time in Bin Jbeil on that trip. We went back to Shatila. We went to another refugee camp, Mar Ilyas, that I hadn't been to before. The smallest Palestinian refugee camp outside of Palestine, I believe. So that was the third trip. The fourth trip.
I'm just going to cut you off.
Sure.
I mean, it's very serious stuff, but I just want to know, how's the food there?
I like Lebanese food. I enjoy Lebanese food, but I also like to have wine with my meals. And in the south, it's very difficult to have wine with your meals. But I mean, it's Mediterranean cuisine. I think it's. I say oftentimes to Greeks, and sometimes they look at me and they go, "What drug is this guy smoking?" I say to them, we have more in common with the Lebanese and the Palestinians than we do with those Germans and those British. We're Mediterraneans. We're all one people. Mm-hmm. You realize that. And some of them go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And others go, oh, no, we're like the Germans and the British. So I appreciate all aspects of Mediterranean culture.
No food poisoning?
No food poisoning.
Are you sure?
No food poisoning.
Okay.
But it's good that I wasn't able to drink because it's good to take a break from wine from once in a while. So I was fine with it. But at the end of the day, no, I was very comfortable in that environment. I have to say that I feel more comfortable socially, politically, in every sense of the word. I feel more culturally, I feel more comfortable in Lebanon than I do in Canada.
Okay. And sorry, I cut you off. You were saying about the fourth trip. When was it? After Said Fouad?
So the spring would have been I believe my third trip to Lebanon. My fourth trip was in August.
How long did you stay there?
It would be about 10 days in August.
Okay.
So in that trip, we went to Beaufort Castle.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to some of the same places we had seen before, but we went to some places I hadn't been before. So the one place we went to was Beaufort Castle. And while we were on Beaufort Castle, we saw an attack on the resistance attacked the Metula military base. We had a clear view of it. It was mind-blowing. They struck it repeatedly with artillery, and then they hit it with this massive thermobaric weapon, and it was like this huge ball of...
You saw that from Beaufort Castle?
Yeah, we saw it. It was a clear day.
Yeah? Okay.
We could see it.
I mean, there's a distance, that's where...
Yeah. No,
okay.
we had a clear view. In fact, my fixer, Hadi, pulled out the camera. We actually published a report about this You can see it on my YouTube channel. I remember, we see this massive ball of flame go up when the thermobaric weapon strikes the thing, and then there was like 5 seconds of silence, and then the sound arrived, and it was, quite astonishing. That you realize at that moment, I realized like the resistance has serious weaponry at its disposal. We were constantly hearing explosions. We were down there, and one time there was an airstrike that was quite close to us, but I hadn't seen anything like that up until that point in time. And then we went to a mountain. We managed to rent a house on top of this huge mountain in South Lebanon. The name escapes me. Safi.
Jabal Safi.
Yes. And you can see like almost the entirety of South Lebanon from...
That's in August, right?
This was in August, yes. This was the last time I was able to access South Lebanon, because in October we couldn't get out of Beirut.
After September 23rd, it's almost impossible.
Yeah. And so another thing we did on that trip was, I think this was probably the most moving experience I had in Lebanon, was we were near the border. I think we were in the area of Nabatea, and we heard that a resistance fighter had been killed from the village of Aita Ashab. And my fixer Hadi says to me, this is a rare opportunity, because Aita Ashab it's been completely bombarded, constantly being bombarded by the Israelis. It's been evacuated. But because the villagers are going to go back for the funeral, we can get in. But we have to go with the funeral convoy. So we did. We followed the funeral convoy into Aita Ashab. We attended the funeral. I would say about a third of the housing and the commercial buildings were damaged or destroyed. And there were Israeli warplanes flying overhead. A couple of times they broke the sound barrier. We heard sonic booms. And people were very calm throughout all of this.
How annoying were the planes breaking the sound barrier? Did you get used to it, or what happens? Because I was used to it. You were used to it.
Well, by that point, because like when you go into South Lebanon, from the very time I went in October, you just get used to explosions, because you can hear explosions all day. Okay. Sometimes it'll go quiet for 2 or 3 hours, but then they'll come up again, and you can hear drones overhead, and you hear the most impressive thing I saw from the Lebanese people, how accustomed they are to this. There was one point, I think it was in this last trip to the south, where we were actually we couldn't get across the Litani River on the bridges because we didn't have a permit. Okay, I think it had to do with the fact that I wasn't from a major media organization, so my fixer says we're not going to be able to do that. So I said, how are we going to get to the south? He goes, well, there's some points you can cross the river by driving your car through the water. It's very shallow. So we found one of those places, and we went, and right by the river where these cars were crossing, there was a cafe, and there were kids playing in the water. It was a hot summer day, and all of a sudden these warplanes come flying overhead, and you hear the sonic boom, and I went, wow. The kids just started pointing, they started laughing. They're pointing to the sky and laughing, and they just continued playing in the water. I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely gobsmacked by, how accustomed they were to this sort of thing. Anyways, I was talking about Safi. So when we were, Aita Ashab. So after the funeral, the thing that really sort of moved me was that the people were incredibly hospitable. There was a young man. If I had to guess, I'd say he was a Hezbollah fighter, but he was not in civilian clothing. He had come there, and he was sitting outside of his home with his family, and they were sipping tea, and the house was half destroyed. And he invited us to sit down, and he offered us hookah to smoke, and he gave us tea. And he was very funny, actually. Very Hadi had to translate, but he was jovial. And then when we got up and we left, there was an elderly lady who went out in front of her house. There was a pomegranate tree, and she picked some pomegranates, and she walked over and she gave them to me. And I just very moved by the hospitality of the people in these incredibly difficult circumstances. And then afterwards, I learned about the incredible role that Aita Ashab played in the 2006 war. That's really where, as I understand it, where the Israeli army was defeated in 2006. this little village 1 kilometer from the border where the resistance fighters had taken the Israeli soldiers, the prisoners of war. Over 5 weeks they couldn't occupy the village, which is amazing, absolutely amazing. So, and I understand they still haven't been able to occupy the village on this round either.
Hopefully they won't.
Yeah.
Okay, and so and then you came back, you stayed there for 10 days in August, and then you went back in only October, or you went there in September? So you went there after the September 23rd and September 27th, where they assassinated Sayyid Hassan
Yes.
Nasrallah, right?
Yeah. So,
I want to read you a quote I got from a New Yorker columnist named Robin Wright. She says, Nasrallah is a man of God, gun and government, a cross between Ayatollah Khomeini and Che Guevara, an Islamic populist as well as a charismatic guerrilla tactician. The black head wrap signifying his descent from the Prophet Muhammad is now his trademark, and he is Lebanon's best known politician. Does that quote reflect who Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is in Lebanon?
that's from the New Yorker?
In 2006, Robin Wright wrote this about Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah.
Interesting. Look, the people that I spoke to would certainly concur with that assessment. They would speak much more highly of Hassan Nasrallah. People I spoke to, I can't, there may be one or two people I can identify out of the dozens and dozens of people I spoke to in Lebanon during the past 2 years who were critical of Hassan Nasrallah. Both of them, interestingly, are Lebanese Canadian, one of whom doesn't live there anymore. But at the same time, even one of those two people was pro-resistance. They don't like Hezbollah. They disagreed because, this person, because of her politics and so forth, I can kind of understand where she's coming from. She's secular, but she still was pro-resistance. Everybody else I spoke to, I'm talking about dozens of people, and I spoke to people who were supporters of the SSNP. I spoke to people who were Christians, or Maronites. They spoke about Hassan Nasrallah with a level of reverence. That's the only way to describe it. That's what I experienced. Now, I'm sure if I had gone and I'd, hung out with people from the Phalange movement, I would have heard nothing but vitriol and hatred towards Hassan Nasrallah. But the people I spoke to were extraordinarily respectful and really, really deeply saddened by his killing.
You arrived when exactly?
On which trip?
On the last trip. Like, when did you arrive?
It would have been October 10th. I think it was October 10th or so.
Maybe like almost 2 weeks after his passing?
Yeah.
Did you feel the impact of his passing on the people?
Yes, there was a lot of sadness.
Okay. So.
Absolutely.
Okay. And how long did you stay after that?
I only stayed on that trip 4 days because that's all my wife would let me stay. They had bombed Beirut for 11 straight days, mostly Dakhia, but they'd also struck in the center of Beirut a couple of times. So I had to negotiate this with my wife.
I'm not going to stay too long on Lebanon, but considering you went back and forth a lot, and we saw a lot of, like now in Gaza, there are over 100, I think, but in Lebanon, there's also a lot of journalists that were killed for no reason at all by Israel. How dangerous was it for you over there?
Look, there wasn't a time when I was in the South when I didn't have in the back of my mind that I could be killed at any minute. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you a story. When I was in Ait Shab, there's a strange character, I'm not going to mention his name, even though I should, who served as a captain in the Israeli military, and he lives in Canada now. And this guy has been trying to cultivate a friendship with me for a number of years. And occasionally he just pops up and he says, let's go out for a beer. How you doing? I hadn't heard from this guy, and I don't trust him. I don't trust anybody who served in the Israeli military unless they've clearly turned against the Israeli military, and this guy hasn't. But he pops up out of nowhere on the day, I think it was the very day when I went to Ait Shab, and he said to me, you have a lot of courage going to that village. He said, I fought in the 2006 war in that village. And the fact that you're standing out there, he said, you should think very carefully about what you're doing. So that, I don't know if he was trying to send a message to me or not.
I was going to say, is that a threat?
He might have been. He's the kind of guy who would do it very subtly, and maybe that's what his intention was. But there really wasn't a time that caused me some concern. There wasn't really a time when I didn't have in the back of my mind that the fact that I might be killed. But at the end of the day, I do have some level of protection because I'm a Canadian. I also have some perhaps additional level of protection because I'm a lawyer, and a well-known lawyer in Canada, relatively speaking. So I think the Israelis, probably would be less inclined to kill somebody like me rather than somebody who doesn't have any of those protections. So I didn't feel like I was the most at risk. There were other people down there who were taking far greater risks than me. Like, for example, we mentioned it before we sat down, Ali Mortada.
Yeah.
Like, this guy's...
I mean, him prior to the war, he went over the fence, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean...
Okay, so the risks I took compared to the risks this guy take are peanuts, absolute peanuts. It's a miracle the man's alive.
Oh, seriously.
He's inviting death.
He's fearless, so, I mean, he's... how did you find him, by the way? I've never met him, so...
He's a very charismatic guy. He's a bit of he's what I would call a glamazon. Mm-hmm. He's got like the very beautiful wife. He's got a beautiful child whom I met. He lives in a nice condo by the sea. Yeah. He works out all the time. He's a very handsome guy. The guy who introduced him to me, my fixer from Al Mayadeen, he said, Ali is an acquired taste. And I said to him after I met him, I said, I think every resistance movement needs people like Ali Mortada. Yeah. You have to have people like him.
Yeah, we need people that are confident and...
and charismatic and reach young people. He definitely does.
I agree. He's doing a great job.
Yeah, but so anyways, and it's not just him. There are people like Marwa Azman is someone. There are people in Lebanon who are taking incredible risks, and I have nothing but the utmost admiration for their courage.
That's a great adventure, man, honestly. I want to go back to the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian plight in Gaza. We both agree that what's going on in Gaza right now is a genocide. However, I had this conversation with somebody I really respect about the effectiveness or the stubbornness that we're showing to actually fight over the word genocide. Whereas for me, genocide is definitely happening. However, it's a means to ethnically cleanse Gaza, and we should actually focus on calling it ethnic cleansing, not fighting over the is it a genocide? Is it technically a genocide or not? And I wanted your opinion on that because I feel like I don't want, like, in a couple of years the court coming up and saying, technically speaking, because of Y, X, and Z, it's not a genocide, and then we forget totally that northern Gaza was ethnically cleansed, and that was the actual objective of the Israelis. So I'm not sure how much energy we should put into actually calling it a genocide, because regardless if it's a genocide or not, they're definitely trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Mm-hmm.
Well, they don't want us to call it a genocide because genocide is the worst crime that a human being can commit. And Israel and its supporters don't want Israel to be associated with that stigma. But that's what they're doing. It's a slam dunk. I mean, this is not debatable. The definition of genocide is basically, destroying a material part of the population, not all the population. Okay, you don't even have to kill most of the population. It has to be a material part of the population. And as the International Court of Justice ruled, the population of Gaza is a material part of the Palestinian population. It's 2.3 million Palestinians, for God's sakes. So they are definitely have the intention of doing that. They've expressed their intention openly, again and again and again. I mean, I can't think of a genocide where, with the possible exception of, the Holocaust, where the leaders, the perpetrators of the genocide, were so open about their intentions. They're saying, we're going to destroy Gaza, we're going to send it back to the Stone Age, we're going to eliminate all the people of Gaza. Even at in Amsterdam, those hooligans from Maccabi Tel Aviv, who were defended by the Israeli press and the Israeli government were shouting, there are no more schools in Gaza because there are no more children in Gaza. They were shouting death to Arabs, and these people are being defended by the Israeli government.
And the Canadian government.
And the Canadian government, absolutely. So I don't know, what more evidence do you need of genocidal intent? It's absolutely crystal clear. And the last element is of the definition of genocide. There are 5 categories of acts that you have to commit, any one of which is sufficient. Israel is clearly committing 4 out of the 5. And arguably the 5th, which involves the transfer of children out of the area of conflict. It's debatable whether Israel's doing that. But the other 4, it's absolutely slam dunk that Israel is doing it. And all you need to do is commit one of these types of crimes to fall within the definition of genocide.
Could you name the 4, if you don't mind?
Causing like intense suffering to the population, killing members of the population, destroying the conditions for, it's not the word they use, reproduction, but basically for, having children, raising children. And I think there's another one probably relates to the destruction of culture and history.
Mm-hmm. By destroying universities, one of the oldest churches in Gaza and whatnot. That's what
they've destroyed the entire educational system. It's just they've wrecked the medical system. In fact, there was a report by UN Independent Commission of Inquiry, which came out in October. An independent commission of inquiry concluded that Israel was committing the crime against humanity of extermination by deliberately destroying the medical system of Gaza. Okay? The evidence is overwhelming. So why are we going to give Israel a free pass? Because Zionists don't like us associating Israel with the most heinous crime known to man? No, I'm sorry. This is an accurate description. It's a slam dunk. And I don't think we should be deterred from calling a spade because Zionists don't like it. To hell with them.
I totally agree with what you're saying. Maybe it's my lack of trust in the international justice system. And I'm afraid that just by default, by being pressured by the US and finding loopholes and not calling it genocide, people are going to forget what the true aim of the Israeli government is, which is to ethnically cleanse not just Gaza, but the whole of historical Palestine. I'm just afraid of that. However, you're right. It is a genocide. There's no debate about that. I want to jump into U.S. politics and its global impact. In one of your Instagram videos, you said something that's very intriguing. You said, if President Joe Biden, given his mental state, isn't making decisions, who in the U.S. establishment is? And I thought about it, and you're right. If Joe Biden clearly cannot formulate and finish a phrase, who in the U.S. is actually controlling and making decisions? So I thought, is it you were working in Wall Street? Is it Wall Street? Is it the military industrial complex? Is it big pharma? Is it big tech? Is it big oil? Is it all of them together? What do you think?
Well, I don't think the corporations and these economic interests are necessarily making the decisions directly. They're doing it indirectly because they have influence over people who have been appointed into positions of power, who, under the U.S. Constitution, have certain decision-making authority. So I think when it comes to foreign policy, I think the decisions at this point are very likely. Again, I'm trying to make an educated guess because I don't have a hotline into the White House. I don't have sources in the U.S. government. So I'm standing on the outside like most people trying to figure out what's going on. The best that I can ascertain when it comes to foreign policy, the decisions are being made by Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. Okay. That's not to say they don't consult the president, but I think the president is such a basket case that they can basically get whatever they want from the man. And, and he just basically signs off because he's a basket case. And when it comes to military matters, I suspect that is being largely handled by Lloyd Austin and probably William Burns, the CIA. But I suspect, my sense is that they probably have less influence with Biden. They're less able to manipulate the intellectually diminished Biden than Blinken and Sullivan are. Again, that's just my educated guess. When it comes to domestic policy, probably the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. has a lot of influence, is making a lot of decisions. Although not much is really happening in that regard. Right now, really, the U.S. government, I think, is gripped with foreign policy and military matters, and domestically, they're kind of on autopilot. And behind those people, there are some very powerful economic interests who are, influencing them and controlling them.
Okay, so could you call those economic interests that are appointing those people the deep state, for example, or the U.S. establishment?
I think they're part of the deep state. I'm perfectly. I know some people think that's that word is like conspiracy theory. I think it's a kind of apt description of who actually controls the U.S. government. The people who actually control the U.S. government are a handful of people who are extraordinarily powerful in the economy, billionaires, people who are extraordinarily powerful in the intelligence community, the most powerful actors in the military military contractors in the military itself. I think probably the U.S. is controlled almost entirely at the end of the day by a few hundred people who are unelected. Some of whom haven't even been appointed to government positions. They're just extraordinarily wealthy.
Okay, and do you think it's an overreach to say that that deep state or that establishment decided that now it's time to bring back Trump?
I've debated this a lot. So there's some people I speak to who are astute geopolitical analysts think that the only way Trump could have won is if the deep state wanted him to win. And that the election and all of the drama that preceded it was just a theater. That the fix was in and it was going to be Trump because they decided it was going to be Trump. Others, and I think I'm probably more in this school, I don't see the deep state as being, it's not monolithic. There are competing interests within the deep state, within, as I put it, these few hundred or maybe it's a few thousand people who effectively control the U.S. government, none of whom are elected, or very few of whom are elected. And that they have competing interests and maybe a competing view about how the U.S. Can best maintain global hegemony. Ultimately, they have the same overarching objective, which is that they want the United States elite to be dominant on a global scale and to have no challengers and to be able to basically pillage and rape any country, any society, and for their own enrichment and power. And they don't care about the American people. It's not for the benefit of the United States that they do these things, it's for themselves. But within that, although their overarching objectives are the same, their tactics are different, and they may have different priorities. They may view people within the deep state, others, as being competitors of theirs. So there's tension, there's disagreement. It's not like they're unanimous on all points. And so I think that what we witnessed over the course of the last really 4 years, because this, they've been trying to undermine Trump since he lost in 2020, is that competing factions within the deep state were locked in a bitter struggle over which faction was going to dominate the U.S. government. And ultimately, Trump's faction prevailed. But like I said, I know people who think that was all just show, and they were all committed to having Trump be the next president of the United States.
Regardless of which theory you're with, however, you could say that elections are not necessarily fixed per se, but you mentioned earlier manufactured consent of Noam Chomsky, is that though that U.S. establishment has the tools through social media, through news, through media outlets, to create this imagery of either Trump or Harris in a way where people are going to vote one way or the other. And they've mastered that skill over maybe, 40 or 50 years, to the point where now if one faction has the advantage over the other to select that contender, so that people actually go with that with Donald Trump. I don't know if you see what I'm trying to say. Is that maybe there was that competing faction, and that there was that competition, and once that competition I mean, once there was an agreement on who won, for example, they selected Trump, and through manufacturer consent, people voted for him.
Well, if you're asking me whether I think the U.S. is a democracy, I say absolutely not. It's not a democracy. That wasn't a real election, because at the end of the day, it's been fixed so that it was a guarantee that one or the other of these two people was going to win. And on 90% of things, they agree. The disagreements between them are relatively minor, right? So
Especially on Israel.
Especially on Israel, but also, on a whole range of other subjects, right? So, I mean, so for example, can you see these people raising either candidate dramatically raising taxes on the billionaire class? No way. No way they're going to do that. Are they going to nationalize, the defense industry, which I think you have to do if you want to have any hope of having a real democracy? No way. No way they're going to do that. They're not going to touch that.
Can you elaborate on that? I didn't understand. What do you mean by national?
I think that if you put arms manufacturers in private hands, and the priority of these corporations is to maximize profits, you're basically setting yourself up for the destruction of your democracy, because they're going to acquire so much money and so much power and use the military capability that they control in order ultimately to snuff out democracy and seize the control of the levers of power. And you don't have to take my word for it. This is essentially what Dwight D. Eisenhower said in the waning hours of his second term in 1961. He's the one who coined the term military-industrial complex. And if you haven't watched his speech, you should watch it, and you should watch it several times. He basically said that American democracy is at serious risk, and the citizenry needs to wake up. And what happened 3 years after he gave the speech? JFK was assassinated. He was assassinated at the time that he was really trying to pursue détente with the Soviet Union, and he was making noises about disempowering the CIA. I don't think, I don't believe the official version of the killing of JFK. Basically, the military-industrial complex, the private ownership of military contractors is a cancer that has metastasized throughout the West. First, it took over, this cancer consumed and killed American democracy, and now it's in the process of killing what remains of democracy in the rest of the Western world. We are, in this country now, largely beholden to the military-industrial complex ourselves.
Also in Canada?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Considering you brought up Canada, you ran for leadership of the Green Party on March 11, 2020. What was that experience like, and why did you do that?
I did it because I'll fall back on the extraordinary analysis of the propaganda system that was put forward by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman. In Canada, we have, and in all Western countries again, very narrow range of permissible debate. Okay, there are certain things you cannot say in the mainstream discourse. If you say them, you'll be banished.
For example?
That NATO is an existential threat to humanity. Okay, you're not going to see that in any mainstream newspaper in this country, nor are you going to hear any member of parliament say it. But it's true, and I believe I can make that case very, very powerfully, just by looking at the record of NATO and what it's doing, particularly right now with respect to Russia. Another thing you can't say, why do we allow people to have billions of dollars? How can you have a democracy in which there are people who are homeless while others have billions of dollars of wealth? That's impossible. You can't have a democracy. Now, you can disagree or agree with me, but are you ever going to hear that? The suggestion that we should abolish billionaires? That we should not allow people to, in the mainstream discourse? It's unthinkable. I could give you plenty of other examples. Okay, there's just lots of things which are legitimate positions that ought to be debated that cannot be addressed in this discourse. And again, I think it's a brilliant that, Chomsky described this phenomenon, but within that narrow range of permissible discourse, you can have very vigorous disagreements. And sometimes even those disagreements are exaggerated because they want to convey the impression of pluralism and a diversity of viewpoints. but you must remain within the boundaries, or else you will be banished from the discourse. So I entered the 2020 leadership contest to expand the boundaries of permissible discourse. I wanted to say things in that leadership contest that no one else was willing to say, but that had to be said, and I wanted to start a debate around these things. Like, one of the positions I took was we shouldn't have billionaires. Why do we have billionaires? What do these people do to deserve that kind of money? You know, I openly argued that NATO was an existential threat to humanity, and we should get out of NATO and abolish NATO. I was the only candidate who did that at the beginning of the contest. Then other people started to adopt my positions on the left of the spectrum in the leadership contest. To my great surprise, at the beginning, I thought there was absolutely no way I was going to win. But I was fine with that. I didn't really want to be the leader of the Green Party candidate because I knew I was going to come under, intense attack if I succeeded. But to my great surprise, the message resonated a lot more than I thought, and I almost did win.
Okay. And what do you think about the current Canadian stance on international conflicts? Meaning the main ones, which is the Gaza genocide and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
I think that I think our government is basically a Nazi regime at this stage. I know that sounds extreme, but I think
I did not expect that.
I think the West generally is descending into Nazism.
Okay, can you elaborate why do you think Justin Trudeau is becoming a Nazi leader?
Well, number one, Justin Trudeau is siding with a genocidal regime. Mm-hmm. Okay, what is the difference between Israel and the Third Reich? What's the difference? The difference is the victims are different. The Third Reich, the primary victims were Jews. In the case of Israel's government, the primary victims are Palestinians. But if you look at the objectives, put aside the identity of the victims and just look at the overall objectives and the tactics and the philosophy of those two regimes, I don't see any material difference between them. To me, this is Nazism, what we're witnessing. And I'm not the only person who's saying this. There are a lot of people out there who are saying this. Israel, I'm hearing this from people in the Jewish community. Okay? Even brothers and sisters in the Jewish community are saying, I don't see a difference between the Third Reich and Israel today other than the identity of the victims. We are supporting that. Whether you think it's Nazism or isn't Nazism, it is unquestionably fascism. It is unquestionably genocidal. Our government is supporting that. Okay? Our government was caught arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. You don't have to rely upon me to believe this. You can go read the Ottawa Citizen. David Pugliese broke this story. And by the way, now he's being accused by some right-wing kook named Chris Alexander of being a paid agent of the Kremlin. Because he has been exposing this kind of stuff. Our government, almost everybody in Parliament gave 2 standing ovations to a damn Nazi in September. Okay? They gave 2 standing ovations to a Nazi. It was a matter of public record that this person had fought Jaroslav Hunka in the Waffen-SS. It was a matter of public record. The government didn't know this? Are you kidding me? The man was introduced to Parliament as someone who had fought against the Russians in World War II. Anybody with half a brain and an ounce of understanding of World War II would have automatically said, if you were fighting against the Russians, you were probably on the side of the Nazis. We were on the side of the Russians in World War II. Our governments, who was on the side of, who was fighting against the Russians? The Nazis. So they claim they didn't know, it was a mistake. Now we learn that the government is concealing the names of hundreds of Ukrainian Nazis who came here in the aftermath of World War II. It's bad enough that we brought them here, knowing that they were Nazis. But now, in 2024, for our government to still be concealing the identities of these peoples, many of whom are dead, I wonder how many are even still alive at this stage. Why are they doing that? Because they don't want us to know how deeply enmeshed they have been with Nazis in the post-World War II period. Mm-hmm. There's a very interesting fellow I follow carefully on social media. His name is Andrei Martyanov.
Andrei Martyanov?
Martyanov.
He's what, Canadian or Russian?
He's Russian, but he lives in the United States, and he's lived in the United States since the 90s, and he's a citizen of the U.S. now. Okay. He served as an officer in the Soviet Navy, and he's extremely critical of Western foreign policy, not a fan of either Trump or Biden. And he made a very interesting comment a couple of weeks ago. He said, the Ukraine war is the final battle of World War II. World War II never actually ended. And the more I've read about this subject, the more I've seen, the more I've come to understand that the moment Jeffrey Sachs just gave a very interesting speech in which he said, the moment that the Second World War ended, which was won by the Soviets, they are the ones who did by far the most to defeat the Nazis.
I think there were 30 million or
the number is around 27 million people.
27 million people died.
They lost far more than all of the Allies, plus Nazi Germany, plus Italy combined. Okay, far more people. So who actually won the war? And Jeffrey Sachs says what happened is the moment the war ended, the Soviets wanted Germany to be disarmed and demilitarized. But the Americans refused because the Americans immediately came to the conclusion that the next war was going to be against the Soviets. So they began to rearm Germany. And then they hoodwinked the Soviets into agreeing to the reunification of Germany, saying we're not going to expand NATO eastward.
They eventually did.
Right. And now what is Germany today? That looks a lot like a Nazi regime to me, let me tell you. Okay, not only are these people completely in bed with this fascist genocidal regime in Israel, but they're resorting to brutal violence in order to silence critics of the genocidal regime. Annalena Baerbock, who claims to be a Green, early on in the Ukraine war, she said openly, the German people don't want us to support Ukraine. Well, too bad. We're going to support them anyways. So these people don't give a damn about democracy. They don't give a damn about civil rights. They don't give a damn about Arab and Muslim lives, the leadership of Europe. They are doing everything possible to, I think, cultivate the far right. They claim to be protection from the far right, but they themselves are cultivating the far right and are adopting in many ways the policies of the far right. So yeah, I know it's a provocative thing to say. I know that they don't look like the Third Reich. Our leaders aren't walking around goose-stepping, zig-heiling, wearing brown shirts. So they certainly said they have business suits on. They look very different. They employ different rhetoric. But if you actually look at their policies and the direction that they're heading, that looks to me like the descent into fascism.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think Justin Trudeau or other leaders in the West, but more specifically Justin Trudeau, wants to support the genocide in Gaza or is forced to support it?
It's...
Regardless, it's happening, but I'm saying...
Well, I just want to say that it's, at the end of the day, I have to start in answering your question by acknowledging that I can't read the man's mind, okay? So I can only make surmise based on what I see and hear from him. I think that Justin Trudeau, and I think this is true of all the leaders of the West, they are only concerned with one thing, and that is their own power and wealth. That's all they care about. And they have, when it comes to power and wealth, enormous aspirations. It's never enough for them. They truly want to be, and they have been for much of the last 30 years, globally dominant. They want to be the masters of the world, okay? And I think that they have come to the conclusion collectively, it's not just Justin Trudeau, that the era of global hegemony for the West, which really began in earnest when the demise of the Soviet Union, is at risk. It's at serious risk. They see themselves losing badly in Ukraine. They are losing and they're going to lose. And that is a NATO proxy war. It's not just Ukraine. It's NATO is being defeated in Ukraine. They see that in the South China Sea, they cannot dominate that region anymore. They may try, but they know that that's going to be extremely difficult with the rise of China. And what's left? What's left is what U.S. military planners called, in the aftermath of World War II, a stupendous source of strategic power and the greatest material prize in human history, and that is the resources of West Asia. That's what's left. That's the one area where they still have a large degree of dominance, but they're being challenged now. And so they've decided, if we lose that, if we lose dominance in West Asia, it's over for us.
When you say they, though, I feel like you're saying all of them, whereas the way some people might see it as the U.S. sees it this way and is forcing all the other leaders to comply.
Well,
Is that?
I wouldn't say they're being forced so much because they're rewarded for it. Okay, they're rewarded for it. Like they're given, look at the clown they just appointed to be the Secretary General of NATO. This moron who used to be the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. He's an incompetent buffoon. They gave them this plum job. They sent the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, I believe it was, Kallas. They just appointed her to be she wasn't elected. They appointed her to be the Foreign Minister of the EU after she was, raving anti-Russian lunatic, calling basically for, Third World War to force the Russians out of Ukraine. So they get payoffs. They get very lucrative jobs. They live in the lap of luxury. They are given positions in the limelight. So is he being forced? I would say he is being, the best word to describe them is vassal. Mm-hmm. So it's like they're kind of like secondary princes. So you have the king, which is the United States elite, and then underneath it they have these vassals, which are sort of the second reign, and they get rewarded to play that role. And I think this is a very sort of instructive way to view the structure of power in the West. So is he being forced? No, I don't think he's being forced. I think he's part of the club, and he's willingly going along because at the end of the day, what he really wants is his own power and wealth and glory.
Okay. One of the dangerous policies that you've opposed is Bill C-70.
Yeah.
Could you explain and tell us why it's a dangerous bill?
Bill C-70 is dangerous for a lot of reasons, but the main reason is it expands certain criminal offenses. One of them relates to it's a provision under the Security Intelligence Act, which potentially exposes people to life imprisonment if they engage in certain types of behaviors which potentially benefit a power that is designated as a terrorist entity. Okay? And one of the behaviors that it prescribes is intimidation. So it doesn't define what intimidation is. So let's look at the example of protests that have taken place on university campuses during the past year. There are a lot of Zionist students on the campuses of these universities who say that Palestinian solidarity protests make them feel unsafe, that they're intimidated by them. Okay, why? Because people are wearing keffiyehs, they're waving Palestinian flags, maybe they say the word intifada, which simply means shaking off. Now, if you accept their reaction as being legitimate, then the people who are protesting there, and one could make the case that they are benefiting organizations like Hamas, even if they aren't openly supporting Hamas and praising Hamas. One could make the case that they are benefiting Hamas indirectly. And by the way, they don't have to do this intentionally, even if it's just an unintentional effect of their behavior.
So
right?
that does not have to be planned.
No.
It could be just...
No. You don't have to prove that they have an intent to aid. This is very dangerous legislation for that reason. So I could see a situation absolutely in the future.
Did it pass or not?
It passed.
And
it was rushed through Parliament.
What does this rush mean?
Well, it normally has to go through 3 readings, and then it has to be reviewed by the Senate, and this takes months, and there's debate. Okay. And this was on a highly expedited schedule. There was almost no debate.
When did it pass?
I think it was over the summer. I was thinking July or August.
After October 7th.
Yeah.
And how many, do we know who voted for it? Or who voted
I don't think anybody voted against this damn thing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm not aware of a single MP who voted against it. It was basically unanimously adopted. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. So I'm saying our government is extremely right-wing. The whole government. We don't realize how... I don't think Canadians understand the extent to which there are fascist tendencies within our government and that we're heading in the direction of fascism. And this legislation is one indication of that. The idea that people could even be at risk even if it's unlikely, even if there's just a 10% chance of having to face life imprisonment because they go on a university campus with a keffiyeh and they're waving a Palestinian flag and they're saying Israel is a genocidal state and it has to be subjected to sanctions. That could happen under this legislation.
Why wasn't there any uproar regarding this? I mean,
there was not in the mainstream. Mm-hmm. The corporate media loves this legislation, but the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, I think it was along with the National Association of the Canadian Association of Muslims, NCCM. I think I have that wrong a little bit, and other groups, peace groups, Arab and Muslim advocacy groups signed on with the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group to declare that this legislation was a severe threat to our civil liberties and to freedom of expression. And their warnings were basically ignored, including by the so-called left in Canada's parliament.
So that bill passed while the Liberals are in power, and this brings us to the upcoming elections. I mean, everybody's saying it's Liberals versus Conservatives. Do you see, do you think that the future is brighter with the Conservatives, or it's worse, or it's just the same thing? What's the difference between these two parties?
The policies, I think, will be certainly not going to be better. I mean, that's for sure. The policies will probably be somewhat more belligerent towards Iran, the Palestinians, China. I think maybe somewhat more belligerent. But the differences are going to be relatively modest. It's going to be more rhetorical than substantive, the differences between them. And I think in a way we may be better off with the Conservatives, because I think that the Liberals are very adept at deceiving the public about their real agenda. The Liberals are not nearly as skilled. I'm sorry, the Conservatives, I think, are not nearly as skilled, and maybe it's intentional, at presenting themselves as progressives when in fact they are, essentially fascists. That's what they are.
Is there any benefit for voting for the NDP or the Green Party?
Would I recommend that people do that? I probably won't. I can tell you that. Mm-hmm. I doubt that I would vote for any party that has seats in Parliament, because I don't think any of them is worthy of government, not under the current leadership. I've actually mulled over the idea of trying to start a movement of spoiling your ballots, a vote strike. So people actually go to the booth and they do something with their ballot to indicate to express a protest that they're not happy with the options. Either that or vote for one of the parties. Like I may actually, even though I'm not a communist, I might vote for the Communist Party of Canada this time around, just because I think their policies are the best ones of any established party out there.
And to finish off, I'm going to finish off with a personal question, which is, Mr. Dimitri, do you see yourself more as a lawyer, an activist, or a journalist now?
Journalist.
Journalist. Okay. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Man. Really appreciate it, Dimitri.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.